Welcome, everybody. This is Travis. We're doing some more talk on rowing today, bringing you a little different format. And so I've been working a lot through GTS Rowing with some of my athletes through remote coaching. And in all of our conversations there's so many times when I've been talking with them and wishing that I could kind of share those conversations with you, the YouTube community. And so I invited two of my athletes, Jeff and Mark, today to join me, who have been working with me for, I think, the second half of 2020 up through now. And we've kind of gone through that initial stages of getting on the same page and making sure both Mark and Jeff kind of understand the methodology and understand each of the workouts and the energy zones that we're training. And I know that I talk about each of those extensively in my videos that I share here on YouTube, but I thought it would be of immense value to just share a discussion with you guys, with those athletes, about what they've learned along the way, kind of the insights that they've had, and how their understanding of each of these training processes, these workouts, UT2, UT1, how to balance work and rest, all of these little nuances have kind of evolved in their own understanding. And so, Jeff, you want to kind of quick intro, maybe let people kind of know where you're coming from, what your background is before we kind of dive in.
Sure. My name's Jeff Wanister. I'm 49. I've been rowing since I was 12 years old. I kind of picked it up in 8th grade. I was lucky because we had a public high school that actually had a rowing team. I rowed all through high school, and then I rowed in college, and then took a really short break, and then I started sculling after that. I was all sweep, and then I sculled up until I was in my mid-30s, where I got a pretty bad rib injury. From all the bad training advice I had gotten up to that point. I had seriously, I was due for a long time for a major injury like that. I had back injuries as I went along, but I usually figured out how to recover from those. But that rib injury did me in for about a year, and then life changed, and I had a kid and stuff like that. And so my kid's now a teenager, so I have a chance to go back and enjoy the sport. Awesome. and hopefully this time do a much better job of training.
It's going good so far, but we'll dive into that in a little bit. And then we have Mark joining us from France. Mark, do a quick intro, let people know where you're coming from.
Yeah, my name's Mark Smith. I'm an Australian living in France. Got into the sport of rowing through the surf lifesaving movement in Australia, where they have what they call the surf boats, and joined one of the many surf clubs we have in Australia on the coastline. Started rowing in the juniors, which is the under 18s, and essentially went through 13 seasons unbroken. Just rowed every season. One of those sports where you sort of punch out through the surf, 500 meters, turn around, come back in with the surf, catching the waves or the little runs or swells are available. But very, I suppose it's quite a challenging sport in terms of its. For many of the years I rowed, there wasn't a lot of influence from the river, the technique side, the whole training, periodization, as much as the coaches, which normally doubled as the sweeps, they tried to do it as best they could. There was a bit of a split down the middle between the river rowing fraternity and the surf fraternity. However, certainly in the last 10 years, even maybe 15, they've come together, and there's a lot more cross-sharing of ideas. And I suppose at the age of 30, I decided I had enough of the surfs and went working bush in Africa, in some of the mines that I've been there, and decided to get back into rowing during the confinement or lockdown period in France last year. Just saw my rowing ergometer that had very little use, decided to get back on it, did a bit of rowing, just started to enjoy it. Then I thought, well, I wouldn't mind trying to compete. And then through one process, just that led me to reaching out to Travis. And I suppose that was the hardest decision, was to ask for help, realise that you you need assistance to get to the next level or achieve your goals. So yeah, I'm glad I reached out because it's really happy with the way things are going.
Awesome. And we can, so, certainly very diverse kind of experience there in terms of the vectors that you guys are coming in. And, there was a couple topics I wanted to kind of cover, and I'll break this video up for all the people listening into those. But the big one is the foundation of training of that UT2. And so, Mark, certainly you were coming in from ocean rowing, where it's just a completely different dynamic, and Jeff coming in from college, which, I certainly have a lot of issues with modern collegiate training, much less collegiate training from 20 plus years ago, and so a lot of our early work, and this happens with a lot of my early work with the remote coaching clients, is just understanding UT2, understanding how to approach it, how to understand, how to get the most out of that time that you're investing, because in that base building period, that UT2 should be over 80% of your training minutes. Even within the pre-competitive and the early competitive phase, it's over 50% of your training minutes. And so it's such this core foundation, and it's also the best medium just to make sure that you're rowing effectively, and you have good technique. And fortunately, both of you guys came in with solid fundamentals there, so we didn't have to focus too much on that. But there was a lot of talk and a lot of back and forth in terms of developing that understanding. And so, maybe we'll kind of start with Jeff, who was coming in from a rowing background, a flat water rowing background, who had certainly done a lot of steady state, a lot of work, kind of what was different there? What was that evolution like for you in terms of kind of understanding this new approach and what you were used to?
So there are a couple of things, when I was in my 30s, I had a good amount of success right before the injury, but that was something that was kind of bound to come apart because of the way I was training. It was a lot of very high intensity stuff and long and high intensity. And I think more so from learning in this process of going back and learning how to train properly was also the idea that making each training session count, not just in terms of having a plan for not just saying, okay, low intensity, long time, go. It was much more of thinking like squeezing as much out of that session as you possibly can, and really having a really good mental approach to each one that you do. Not just showing up, pulling on it and leaving, which is kind of like, the thought process when I was in college and after that was just put the time in, just crank.
And it's interesting, like as a coach, I look back to my own athletic career and how when I was achieving the things I was achieving, and I was a runner in high school, and then I switched to rowing, and I was fairly successful within my own small pond there pretty quickly. I quickly became the fastest lightweight at my college club, and then was among the fastest in the States. And then, when I went to Philadelphia, I was in the finals of, the single scull, intermediate single, within 2.5 months of picking up that, and then was winning Canadian Henley and nationals the next year in the quad. And so, and that happened so fast. And there was so much of it where I was just like, I'm enjoying the success, but I went from being kind of like a district level cross-country runner, track runner, to being, national champion rower within 3.5 years. And so it was always kind of like, there was kind of voice being like, how am I doing this? I don't envision myself as that athlete. And it wasn't until I started coaching and started seeing other people that it really gave me an appreciation for my own success, in the sense of how natural it was for me to sit down in a session and, like you said, have goals and be very, very mindful about every stroke that I'm taking. I was, hear about people, they go and they're like, yeah, I went for a run and I was thinking about all the stuff that was happening at work, and I was listening to music, and, I was just kind of planning my day. And I was like, I'm just thinking about, how's my foot hitting the ground, and is my stride consistent, and is my breathing, economical, and I transfer that to rowing. And when I was on the erg, it was always like, are my arms in a good position while I'm changing this direction? And you think about that 900 times over the course of steady state. And I see these other athletes that are just like, yeah, they're just there. They might be chatting with their friend, you know, which would generally be like, this is not social time, this is rowing time, you know, and just like they would think about all this stuff and just not focus on the task at hand. And realizing that was why I'd been successful, was that mental mindset. So it's interesting to kind of hear that from you.
Just to make a little distinction in there, which is interesting. Part of it too was like, I was a pretty technical oriented rower. I'm a 6 foot guy, so I would have to compete with a lot of guys that were like 6'4", 6'5", and in order to kind of try and keep up with them or have a chance of making the first boat, I was very technically oriented on a lot of that stuff, kind of like what you were talking about, which it did garner quite a bit of success. And as later I was doing ergs, I never listened to music or watched a show. It was always focused on the technique. The distinction I think here that I've learned a lot from what you're saying was it was also in that process was the thinking of like executing the fitness work of like, what are you trying to achieve fitness wise on here, and making sure every stroke that you're moving in that direction of like, how do I execute the workout that he's asking for in the way that he's doing it, in order to achieve as much as possible with each session. Not just saying, okay, here's my heart rate or here's a rating, and then just kind of letting it go all over the place. You're trying to execute something. So you're sensing what you're doing, how your body's feeling, how your body's reacting between each workout, but also during the workout, and understanding yourself so that you can execute, like saying, how do I get the most out of each one of these? And let me see how I feel afterwards. That was another wrinkle that I never thought of before, just from day to day, from stroke to stroke, to workout, from week to week, to month. It's like, how is that process going? And how is my body reacting to those things? And I had never thought about that. It was more of just like bang my head against it over and over and over again, just put the miles in. Doesn't matter if you're tired or if you get on there, your whole body kind of burns a little bit when you start purling. You're like, oh, I'm fine. You know, I just have to pull on it. You know, like that eventually, you know, takes you apart. The wheels just fall off that wagon eventually. And it was one of those things where it's like really listening to how I'm reacting, executing, and seeing how the reaction is. How fast do I recover? How is that affecting my performance? Do each time, and I'm getting down to the minutia now, which is like, how many strokes did it take to do that piece? Did I do less or more, or did I kind of like pop just half a stroke up once in a while, you know, to kind of get that same result? And then seeing how the heart rate versus, you know, the temperature, seeing that in more detail, seeing how that reacts and seeing how my body reacts and being more consistent.
And Mark, I mean, you're coming from it completely different, because I mean, you know, ocean rowing, I got to imagine, is almost all anaerobic, right? You know, you got to get a very large boat over some fairly rough
one of the
waves.
One of the things you say in a 2,000 meter race in one of your videos, don't do stroke lifts during a race. Just don't lift for 20, because you don't do it. Whereas in surf, you are constantly doing it, and particularly, say, you jump it, you know, that's the one thing, you jump into a boat. You're not sitting in the boat when you take off. You physically jump and throw yourself in and punch hard to get through the surf. And then the surf can be big and it can be small, and some waves knock you and you get pushed back and you got to start again. So there's a fair bit of stop and start. And then you get past the breakers, and then you start to settle it down, and then going into the turn, you lift the pace again. Then you turn, and it's a 180-degree turn. So the boat's stopping. So then you've got to pick up a dead weight and start again. And then on the way home, you've got to take advantage of whatever swells or little runs are there. So you're picking the rating up, and then when you get into the wave zone, then you're off. Then you basically go. But that's surf for you. So I suppose from my perspective, as someone who's had 20 years off from rowing, coming back into it, what I already knew going into trying to row again was that it's commitment. If you want to be successful, you want to be competitive, you have to be commitment. You've got to learn to hurt a bit. But concepts such as UT2, UT1, ATTR, I had no idea what they were. I don't even know if those phrases or those, they existed. 20 or 30 years ago, because I certainly didn't hear them down the surf area. But one of the things with your videos, and one of the reasons I did reach out, Travis, is that those videos are very informative on what those concepts are. And when I was researching and realizing that if I wanted to get better, I needed to have a coach and someone who knew what they were doing and played the long game rather than the short game. Those concepts became very important to understand. And I suppose as I've gone along and understood them, I've been able to execute those sessions better. And I think, Jeff said something, sometimes you just get in the boat and you just go and you belt along and you feel good after it. But then I suppose from my perspective, when you come back into it, you're only, say I'm 50 now, time is precious. You don't want to be wasting time going through the motions. And that, rowing you can't do it half-hearted if you want to compete.
Yeah.
You have to fully commit to it. So you don't want to be wasting time at 50 doing things which aren't going to make you go faster when you actually need to go faster. And I think that's where, as an athlete, I suppose, and I'm hearing it from Jeff, we're a little bit more mature in that respect of realizing that we've got limited time left to do this. We've got to get it right now. And every session's important. Every stroke's important in a way.
Yeah. And that kind of resonates with just one of my core tenets as a coach, is that just to respect the time of the athlete, and I think that there's a lot of coaches that bring a lot of ego into it. And they're like, those athletes are kind of a tool for me to kind of, achieve my goals, and certainly not all of them, but, a lot of them, and they don't have that respect. It's like, well, I'm going to ask you to invest this time. So it's up to me to ensure that investment is worth your time, and I think that also, and this is a problem that I have with kind of the mainstream coaching, whether it's in high school or college, is that, there's, a lot of the coaches will go in and be like, this is the program, we're going to do it. And there's no nuance to the program to address the individual. It's kind of more of a, somebody who has a large group of workers and they have a job to do. And it doesn't matter who the workers are, as long as the job gets done, and I think each of those workers comes in and they're kind of part of the system. And there's this kind of mentality, and Mark, I'm not sure if it translates to Australian culture as well, but in the US of kind of a, it's weird because, the US is known for its independence, but in the athletic world, there's kind of this sense of sublimation to the whole, of kind of sacrificing what your goals are for the sake of the team and sake of the whole. And as a coach, I would always say that it's always the needs of the individual first, and then the needs of the team, and then the wants of the team, and then the wants of the individual, and so, it's like, and I think people are, confuse those top two, where they're like, they put the needs of the team over the needs of the individual. And if I always took the approach is like, if you don't take care of the machine, the parts of your machine, the machine's going to break down in time. It'll work for a while, then it'll break down. Like if you don't put oil in your car, you're going to be able to drive for a while, and then eventually your engine's going to seize and you're never going to drive it again. And I think that people are so focused on that period where they can drive their car without oil because they're not focused on taking care of the gears. Or, in the sense of college coaches, they're like, well, I'm going to get a new engine in a year or two, or 4 years, at a most. So like, do I care what's going to happen to this engine a year, 2 years after college, because I basically ran them into the ground, and so you just get these coaches in these systems, and especially at the high school level, where really the success on a lot of instances, it's more of like, how hard is the coach willing to push their athletes at the expense of their long-term development is going to determine how well they do competitively. And so in a sense, the best coaches in high school are the coaches that are not at the very top, because those are the coaches that know they're developing that athlete for the long term. It's like, it thrills me to know when my athletes, my kind of mediocre, not mediocre, but my slightly above average athletes are excelling in college because they've been developed and given that foundation to move forward, and not just what's the most I can get out of them in high school, and then let the college coaches deal with the ramifications of those decisions. And I think that that's certainly why the U.S. elite, the national team suffers, because the colleges are burning out athletes, and they are able to achieve moderate success just because our population is so enormous, so they have such a huge recruitment pool. But, from the athlete sense, and I took this from my own, and, as an athlete, I was like, well, I want to be successful. I want to go in and I want to be successful in that team, and it's like, I want to be part of a successful team. But if that team is successful and I'm over here injured or burned out, then that's not a good thing, and I think that there's this weird, and certainly, for me, and what I've loved doing with GTS and stepping away from kind of that coaching in that team environment is that, we can dive fully into each of your goals with the perspective of your background, where your experience is, what's happening in the rest of your life, because we're all adults now. You have family, you have children that you're raising, you have careers that you got to balance. And so that's part of why kind of, I've enjoyed that. And this process, certainly working with you and the other athletes so much, is that we can focus on the individual a lot more. But I'm curious with each of you, like what, and trying to now dive into kind of the specifics of UT2, what it was, tell me a little bit. I'll start with you, Jeff. I'm bouncing off because you had an idea of steady state coming in, and we had to completely rework that idea. So maybe share some of your conception of what you should have been doing and what you were doing to kind of what you learned along the way. And then Mark, we can kind of, dive in from a completely alien, foreign perspective, and developing an understanding of what that UT2 was.
Yeah.
Wrong conception to no conception, right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, in high school and college, it was just because you were, sitting next to, I think a lot of it was like team think, in the process, but also probably not a history in terms of the team. The culture that we had in high school was just, that we created was just pull, just get on it, jump on it, and pull as hard as you can, I think. And that works to some degree in high school because you're so young, you can recover so quickly. I didn't really get a concept of steady state until we got into college, where we do, at some point we do an hour every week at some point. And the idea was like, it was always put the score up on the board when you're done. And it was always a test. So there was never a communication of like, oh, this achieves this intensity achieves this, and this achieves that. That was never really explained to us at all in college. It was just like steady state, go pull, put your score up on the board. And that was it. That was literally the entire communication to the process. So for me, it was just like, all right, how can I do this at a tolerable level that I'm not destroyed tomorrow, but that I can perform well compared to the rest of the team. So steady state was really kind of implied as something that is just like, what's your best training time you can get for an hour? What's the most meters you can get in an hour
without destroying what you're going to do the next few days?
Exactly. Without hindering the performance on the next day, because you needed to also post those scores.
Yeah.
So it was never, you were never trying to achieve something with each workout. You were just showing up, pulling, and then moving on to the next day. So it was more of like a battle of attrition through the process to try and make that first boat. Mm-hmm. And so my concept was at that point, had no idea what steady state was supposed to be. After I came out of college and moved on to, rowing independently, I realized, being on my own, after a couple of injuries, I was like, this is not working anymore. Like my body, I'm not performing in spite of it. Now it's hurting me. And so I did some research on it, but it was still limited because of the culture of rowing, of like what's effective, and I think coming out of the early 90s, that was when they were talking about lower intensity stuff having more of a specific purpose. But even then it wasn't really explained. It was just like, oh, this intensity, this band, this band, this band. And it was also all just heart rate. It was just like, I want your heart rate was, which for me was odd because, the heart rate ranges that he talked about, like the FISA program was like, UT1 was 150 to 160 and UT2 was 150 and under. But for me, my max heart rate in college was like 215, 220. Mm-hmm. So when they were talking about that, I'm sitting there pulling on it. I was like, this can't be right. I feel like I'm walking.
Yeah.
I think I'm doing the same thing. If you know what I mean? Like I felt like it was just a walk in the park. I was like, I don't see how this could possibly be effective. So I did some more research to kind of figure out where those kind of heart rates, and I was like, oh yeah, there's some variability, but it wasn't as through the roof as mine was. So it was still super confusing because, and that's kind of like an inkling of like where maybe a heart rate, heart rates were maybe a flawed way to look at it because I was kind of an outlier in that process going like, you're right.
And it blows me away how that hasn't been exposed, and I mean, it's the discussion of heart rate is what kicked off kind of my just kind of porch talks, for the channel. And I'd seen a video by Cameron where he talked about heart rate. And I was like, dude, this is nowhere close to accurate. And Cameron has a large audience. I feel like I need to say something, to correct this. And I have no doubt that what Cameron was saying was accurate because, it's such a huge range of people in the heart rate. Some people are going to fall within the definition, the common definition. Some people, that's going to be their heart rate. But the problem is you're just there randomly, by chance, and then you get the people who are, notable athletes that happen to fall in that. And they're like, well, this works. And it's because I was in this range. It was like, no, it's because your range happened to be UT2, and so you were able to draw success from it, but even if 40% of the population aligns with kind of those popular definitions, and I would say that 40% don't, but let's be generous. Like I have so many athletes like what you said. I have athletes that they do their steady state at 185, 190, and then they get into college, one of which went to BU, your alma mater, and she comes back and they're making me do steady state at a 135 heart rate, 140 heart rate. And I just want to shoot myself, cause I'm sitting on an erg doing that for an hour and a half, and that athlete's steady state should have been in the 180s. I'm just like, it's horrible. And these colleges, because they're not good. Like they catch on to a fad, and the coach is like, we're going to do heart rate training this year. And they don't understand the concept. And
I think there's also culture within those crews. Cause like BU kind of came out of a tradition that they had guys that pulled really hard and they just kind of tried to compete with Harvard and stuff like that. There was never a culture of, let's break this down and see what makes real success. It was just pull harder the next day. It's a very different culture than, what you talk about with this stuff, which is like, make sure you know what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah. And then, added onto that, between the college and the high school of like, there's always selection happening. There's never a period where it's like, we're not selecting, we're just training. No matter what you do, doesn't matter, what's going to happen in the long term, both in the sense of you do have to create synergy in your crew and you got to train those people together, and two, you want to keep it competitive. And I understand it. I was a coach, I certainly was involved in that and somehow, but, to go into training methodology, you're making significant sacrifices of your long-term speed to constantly be in a position where you can perform in selection. And I was talking about this with a new client I just picked up last week, who's familiar with cycling. And we were just talking about, cyclists enter early tours, in the summer. They have no intention of winning. They don't want to win. They're just putting in that miles to kind of be ready and be sharp for the tour that matters. For most of them, that's the Tour de France. And they don't care what's happening in the early season, whereas, continue to kind of, use BU as an example, and certainly not to say they're the only ones, but you have all these early cup races, and you want to win those cup races, and you're going to make training accommodations, on some level to be able to perform in that. But that is ultimately taking away from what's going to happen kind of in the long term, and I would find, with my athletes, it was interesting because I would run the spring season and then I would run a summer program, and the athletes would just be so much more competitive in the summer, which is what I knew I was training those athletes for. And so we would essentially train them through the spring, and they were top level athletes, but they weren't national finalists or national medalists, in the spring. And then suddenly these same athletes, were top contenders because we didn't care what was happening, in those early races. It was like, I want to sharpen these athletes because I know if I can get these athletes to medal at the club national championships, then they're going to get much better attention from colleges than if they're just, winning a lot of regular season races. But Mark, so yeah, you were coming in, you'd essentially never done UT2, never talked about steady state, and then we had to essentially develop that understanding of it. My sense was for you, it's just like the workout was defined by the time. It was like, it's a 40-minute workout, it's a 60-minute workout. I'm going to row hard for this amount of time, and there was kind of no understanding of that, which we had to kind of separate and then temper on some degrees as well to kind of to be able to relax while still being aggressive. And I definitely don't want people to listen to think that steady state is easy, and I tell people that a lot. Steady state isn't easy miles. Steady state is quality miles. It's tempered in terms of the speed, but I would not consider it long. So we're not talking about cycling miles, where you go out for 3 hours and you're just like putting in the miles. Like, that's not what steady state is for rowing. And that's what the heart rate people want you to believe, that it's just like little conversational rowing paces, which is not the case. You got to find that balance. But Mark, how did that evolution happen for you?
Well, I suppose I think when I reached out to you, I'd sent you a program or something I'd downloaded on the web, which, a couple of the authors of the Concept 2 program were fairly well known. I mean, Terry O'Neill and Jürgen Grobler.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a great read. 200 odd pages. It covers so much on rowing and the ergometer, but there are gaps in it which can only really be filled in with a properly educated, trained coach who I think has also been a rower themselves, and is probably a current rower in a way, knows what the erg is about, uses it themselves. And one of the things was UT2, and the advice I'd read was that in this particular manual was that UT2 was a stroke rate of 20 to 22.
Yeah.
And so, not really knowing anything about it, I just started doing that. Doing that UT2 at between 20 to 22 and sitting around a split of 2 minutes for 500 and gradually building up. Damper setting was on 10, didn't really know much about that. So, and I'm a lot more educated on it now, and that's probably why I've got a lot. I really enjoy that part of the training, and no back injuries, because rowing with a damper of 10 is just. I just think it's. They almost should put it on every type of piece of information, even putting on the Concept 2 themselves. Don't row on a damper of 10. It's crazy
a
stuff.
rib injury or a back injury, one or the other, or both.
It's crazy stuff, guaranteed to give you a back injury. Sure, it may have a role in some type of strength work, but yeah. So I got the rating wrong. I probably got the duration wrong, and I got the damper wrong. And that was probably the biggest transition in teaming up with yourself, Travis, is, change the, drop the damper, get an appropriate drag factor. And you were quite upfront that drag factor we may have to tweak that a bit, move it around a bit just to see how we're going. And I didn't then really understand what you were saying by that, but I go with it. And you drop the rating down. And I think on the first couple of sessions, I might have done 19 to 20, and you said, no, move it down to 16, 17. And the great thing with that is that when you start at those lower ratings, at the right drag factor, yeah, it might be a little difficult to start with, but it's a good way to ease into UT2. And it's a good way to ease into the time that you need to spend at UT2. And as you start to row with that intuitive feel of, well, I'm doing well at 16, couple of the splits just by nature of getting fitter, more conditioned, they're starting to come down, then start to move in a little bit of 17, so cadence, and then a bit more of 18. And, I've been doing the UT2, I think now with you for say 5 months. And, a session is just sitting between 17 to 18 strokes per minute, minimum 1 hour. And, I don't have a problem sitting on the erg for an hour. It's just you'd say it's enjoyable, therapeutic. You just do it. And I think the other thing with understanding UT2 is that expression, you've got to go slower to go faster. And I don't know if that's taken a while for the penny to drop for me, because that natural inclination is to go fast and try to put more weight on the handle, but that's not what UT2 is. And UT2 has got to be done within a certain boundaries, and you will get the benefit of it. And aerobically, it was probably into the second month that I started to feel the aerobic benefit come in. And it's just been getting better and better ever since. Breathing is fluid now. It's in sync with the stroke. But no, it's been good. And the other thing is, which I suppose a lot of coaches, certainly when you're in your 20s, they don't focus enough on, is you've got to do a warm-up. Certainly at the age of 50,
yeah,
it's critical to warm up properly. And it's just as critical to do the cool down properly. Whether that's those things I've seen in your videos, the Indian squats, spend a bit of time, just stretch there, gently cool it down. It's amazing the next day. And this is probably more after maybe a UT1 or an AT. You do your proper cool down and you row that lactate out of your legs. And you do that and you compare that to a day where you haven't done that, and it's chalk and cheese. So that's those type of things. A session, I suppose I've got more out of it from a UT is that it's not just the actual rowing. It's the prep, the row, and the cool down on all sessions. Essential, probably more for the masters athlete. We need to take care of our bodies because they are a little fragile.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that with the masters athletes, if you don't do it, bad things are going to happen. But it's just as essential with the youth. Like the performance, you talked about the performance benefit of how much different you feel the next day. That's going to transfer to the youth. You're going to get a lot more out of it. And I think that one of the big things in successful training is that it has to be a continuum. Like, it's like the one session can't have too much of an impact on your ability to do the next day's session and to kind of continue on. And clearly you're going to have work days and rest days, but if it's like, well, you had a work day and rest day plan, but you went too hard or too long, or you didn't warm up right, or you didn't warm down properly. So then you take your rest day and then you're not ready on that next day to go because you did too much damage on that first day, then that's a problem. And you had talked about kind of that, that holding back. And it made me think that, you hear so many people say that, you should go after it. Every day should be like a race day. And it's like training is by definition sub-maximal. Training is by definition a pace that you should be able to do better at. It's like UT2 is not a 60-minute race every day. UT2 is a restrained thing. So you can always go faster. If you're a 2-minute split on your UT2, then it does not take a lot of effort to row 159, and then it doesn't take a whole lot more effort to row 158. The problem is that if you don't shift enough to get into UT1 to create that training effect for UT1, you're getting the same amount of UT effect, but you're creating more fatigue. And that's where I talked about kind of in those gray zones. And that's true all the way up to, to transport. Like you should always have a little bit, touch left in the tank and transport. And there's ways to manipulate that so you can still go fast. Maybe you're doing transporting, you're going at full effort, 6 beats or 4 beats below your race pace, so that you're holding it back by basically, pulling that stroke rate down. But yeah, there should always be this knowledge that, you had a little bit left, kind of in that training, or a lot left if it's steady state. And I think that people just kind of get seduced into those gray zones because it's easy to go a little bit faster. It's easy to go from working at 40% to working at 42%, and there are lots of tricks, and we talk about that, and we'll talk about this, shortly in the video. There's tricks to make sure that you can work and what it should feel like, so that you can still feel like you are working hard, without pushing into that gray zone, and stroke rate being one of them. It's like, 2022 is not a good stroke rate for UT2 unless maybe you're an elite athlete in the competitive season. And then maybe you can kind of flirt up there. But even those elite athletes, they're not doing all their stay at 2022. I mean, just look at video of, you talked about, Jurgen, writing that document. I mean, you're not going to see Penset or Redgrave doing their steady state for 2 hours out of 22. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
But the problem is, and you talked about the drag factor as well, and the people out there, is like, people will hear somebody, like Eric Murray say, well, I do a drag of 130. And it's like, so everyone's like, all right, well, we should do a drag of 130, so, and there's no context to that comment. There's no, and people, and we all know it, like everyone listening knows it, the three of us know it. When you're telling someone about the training that you're doing, you always tell them about the best training that you're doing. You're never like, even I catch it, someone asks me, well, what do you do for drag factor? Or what is your split for this? I'm always like, I always go to, what's my fastest split? I'm not going to the average. I'm not going, it's like, I'm like, yeah, 158. And it was like, I'm not being like, well, a lot of days I was 202 and most days I was 2 minute. I'm like, no, there's the days that I was 158. So that's what my answer is. And so people hear that, and then they get this skewed perception of reality.
Well, the other thing with UT2, which I've learned from you, is you row yourself into the session. It's okay to start 202, 203.
Yes. Yeah.
And row yourself into it, and let the body start to talk to you, because you lose before you know it, in a lot of the sessions, without even changing the rating, the split has dropped. And I think I've said in some of my notes, training notes to you, I don't know what I was doing, but all of a sudden I'm sitting on a certain split at a certain cadence, and I'm almost in that third person looking down going, I haven't got set out in this session to do it. I'm just feeling good, and I'm tapping it along, and it's feeling great. What I do like in the UT2 is that your advice is that you look at, say, your 10-minute blocks, there should be that marginal negative split going along. So if you do have the temptation to want to race or go a bit harder, you structure it. So you just apply a little bit more loading every 10-minute block and hold that. And you've mentioned a skill with racing, or a skill is to be able to sit on a certain cadence at a certain split and hold it, not have it bounce up and down, and again, I think Jeff was talking about, you got goals when you go into these sessions, and certainly they're one of my goals, is to count the strokes that you're holding a certain split at. And you're holding the rating, you're looking at that monitor, and you're going, okay, 20, 21, 22, oops, got that stroke bumped up or bumped down, so you're back to concentrating, and you're getting that aerobic benefit, but you're also training a little bit up here. You're just keeping it sharp, keeping it interesting. So
I think also, like, one of the things I learned through this process was, like, which I'm one of the things I'm really enjoying, because Travis, we talked about this, was like, whether I compete or not, I'm not too worried about it at this point. It's more of just like the process I'm so fascinated by, and learning from you about that versus my preconceptions and my training methodologies that were before this whole process for me is like the process, and learning to tune into where my mind is in the training, and how I'm the process that I'm thinking about while I'm doing that. And it's so interesting to get better at reading what my body is telling me rather than ignoring it and just pulling. I'm listening to all the signals of what my body tells me as I'm going along, and seeing how that, as I go building through those process, building my way through a steady state like UT2. I mean, I had one yesterday that I felt probably one of the best I've ever felt. It wasn't the best I've done, but it was the best I've ever felt, only because of my approach to it is getting more refined and more practiced. And I actually started a second slower than I usually do, just to see, okay, let me see what my body tells me at each stage and as I go along. And it was more of like the split started coming down, because I split it up into 15-minute sections, and I would say, okay, the first part of it I'm going to see here, and then if my body kind of feels good, I'll just move up, but I'll kind of just listen to what my body tells me I can do that or not. And I was realizing through it, it was like this momentum, like Mark was saying, was like you're kind of in your third person, and you kind of start yourself seeing like, oh wow, the split's kind of like popping down, once in a while. I'm not trying to pull harder. My body's just into that mode that it just drops, and then all of a sudden it drops, and then it starts sitting there. Same comfort level. It doesn't really feel like you're pulling harder. It just kind of starts dropping. And then, section by section in those 5 minutes, I would just get like half a second faster, or, tenths of a second faster on average, just more of those strokes coming down. By the end, you're like something in the warm up when you're starting, kind of just feeling those pieces out before you get into it, was like, oh, when I was at 16, this 156, 157 doesn't feel great, but you're at the end of like a 75-minute and you're like, oh, I'm hitting a 156, 157, and it feels comfortable. I'm not forcing myself to get into that number. It's just kind of happening without forcing it. And then it's weird to have it kind of feel like you're kind of psyched to be in that last 10, 15 minutes. You're like, wow, I feel great, versus feeling like, oh shit, can this please just fucking end?
Yeah. And that's such a huge kind of defining feature of kind of UT2 when done right, is that the longer you go, the better you should feel if you're doing it right. The better you should feel and the faster you should be, and I think, we talked about kind of that ramping up, and it's like, for those that, and listening, you're essentially starting deliberately, several seconds slower than what your usual average is. Yeah. And you're just it's going to get lower and lower as time goes on. And it should not be getting lower because you're like, all right, I'm going faster now. All right, I'm going to go with the next split down. And while you were talking, Jeff, like the metaphor occurred to me. It's like if you're on a horse, right? And it's the difference between holding the reins and slowly letting go of the reins and letting the horse go faster, versus spurring on the horse and kicking on the side. And I think a lot of people are spurring on the horse. They're like, this is hard, but I got to keep pushing, versus you're always going and you're always holding onto those reins, and you just feel the longer you go, the better you feel and the faster you feel like you want to be. And every couple minutes, every 10 minutes or so, you can release those reins a little bit, and the effort should feel the same. It's like, you should never finish those steady states feeling worse than you started. And I always say, every 5 minutes should be a little bit better than the last. And we're not talking to 201 to 2 minutes to 159. We're talking like 201.3 to 201.2, to 2 minutes, or 201.0. And, it's easing down. But if you're doing it that way, the difference between your slower days and your great days is the rate at which you're improving. It's not where you started. It's like, all right, did my body just naturally go from a 202 down to a 158 without any effort, and it went there really quick? over the course of 40 minutes, you know, or did it take 60 minutes for that to happen? And then the average of that line is the average for that steady state on the day. And I think, you know, you see so many people, and I see it with, you know, certainly athletes too. And it's unfortunate because the tougher athletes suffer the most in this, because they're the ones that can hold on rowing and gritting it out longer, but you got to pay the piper eventually. Like those athletes, they're going to burn out. They're going to break, you know, eventually.
I broke in.
And so, and it's just a matter of like the weak ones will break after a month, you know, the tough ones, it might take 6 years, but it's going to happen, you know, and that's what, you know, that's certainly why our national teams, I think, are weaker than they should be. Is just because I think all that talent has been burned out in their early 20s, whereas you should be peaking in your late 30s, mid 30s. You know, if you're a rower, you know, that's when the body is ideal for rowing, or should be at its peak for rowing. But yeah, so those are the stroke rates there. And in terms of the effort and feeling it and kind of and how to go, like how do you guys define that? You know, I know I have my definitions of how I say it. Like when you're sitting down, when you describe what UT2 should feel like for those athletes, you know, what is your way of communicating that?
I suppose the way I visualize a lot of the UT2 is like, it's like you're on the river, you're in a single scull, and you come down the slide slowly and drop the blade in and have you swish, and then you let it go, and you go gently down the slide. And so it's just a gentle stroke rate, 17 to 18, visualizing a good catch, right amount of, you know, a type of weight, or a type of, you feel the catch, you feel the weight, you take it, and then you just let it sort of pop off the hands, and you're just visualizing nice, controlled, easy. I suppose that's what I'm really focusing on during the UT2 is you're looking, trying to keep the split and the cadence together, taking into account that every 5 minutes or every 10, I'll just drop at a point, and I'm talking more the split rather than the cadence. You try to just keep going along at 17 and maximizing what you're doing there. But I mean, I think you've said it once or said it several times, that when you finish, it's that state of pleasant fatigue. Mm-hmm. You just get off and undo your feet from the chocks, and with 30 seconds, you get up and go. I pull my iPhone out, take a shot of the screen, and just get up and grab my water and just a little bit of a walk around. But you're not panting, you're just not blowing out by it. It's just a nice, like a good row on the river.
And Jeff, we work a lot on heart rate, and you had brought that up earlier. You know, talk to me a little bit about kind of how that evolution has been and what you've learned, because I certainly, you know, if it hasn't been obvious, I have a very different approach to heart rate. And I think people might misinterpret kind of my videos as saying I'm against heart rate, whereas I'm very much for it used properly. And a lot of our early conversations, because heart rate was a big thing that kind of you used and recorded, and we were actually able to learn a lot from your heart rate and let you see kind of the decisions that you're making, because we could see those decisions manifest in your heart rate curves. And so I'm curious kind of, you know, if you can share a little bit about those insights that you developed along the way.
I think you had a great video just talking about, I think the misconception is, you know, and I agree with you on this, is like that you go on heart rate, but you know, as we went through this process, we talked about this, how variable that is, and especially if you have a greater range. I almost feel has a huge range on that, and what happens is you don't realize how many things outside of that play a factor in heart rate. And to use it, it's a good metric because it can be used to kind of inform you on improvement, you know, as you're going through. But I don't think it's a great metric, and even that has some interesting parts that I'm learning. But it cannot be like the primary based thing. If I'll step back for a second, kind of going on your horse metaphor with the reins, you know, I was in CrossFit between my old rowing and between back into rowing now, and I hammered the weights too, getting several injuries, and learning from this has kind of made this process coming back to this so interesting. Is that I learned, like, a lot of those guys that are older that still weightlifting are successful, they made this comment that was like, they're like, when you're early, you see the bar as an enemy, you know, the barbell as an enemy. It isn't until you get later and you get really good, it's your ally. It's the relationship you have with that bar that allows you to be successful. And now it's the same thing now. It's like, it's a relationship you're having with it, and being able to talk to yourself and being able to talk to your effort and being able to see what your heart rate's doing and all that stuff. And those are all metrics that play in a part of you being able to execute something like UT2. It's a learning process. You can't just say to someone, hey, execute UT2, go, you know, just keep it in this heart rate, because that's not executing it. Executing is understanding yourself in that process to understand when it's really super successful. And you can do it here and just use those other metrics like heart rate to be a process of it. When we first talked about it, I was so oriented on that. I would just get near the end of a steady state and I would start coming down to keep it in it. And I was like, that's not necessarily, because there were times when it felt terrible and I would have to bring it down. There were times I feel great and I'm like, oh, I have to bring it down. Yeah. Like, I feel so good. That should tell you right there. It's like, oh, wait a minute. This is not informing me completely of what I need to execute in this process. And it was also that process of having, you know, kind of crazy heart rates. That's when we started talking. You said, look at the curve you're going through this. This is going to tell you, as you see your heart rate as a graph across the whole thing, is if you're seeing this, or, you know, kind of this, you know, as you're going, it's telling you, your body's telling you something on that process. It should be a build of like just slowly coming up as the heart rate goes along. And that curve is a really good indicator. It's not how high or low the heart rate, it's that curve. If you are coming hard, your heart rate's going to go like this. That's telling you either fatigue or you're going way too hard too early. It's not the heart rate, it's from the beginning to the end that's telling you, you know, that variability, as you put it, I think that told you a lot.
Yeah, it's so the variability and the inflection points. And I remember, and I used your curves in that video for the thing, and like and I remember the first time that you had kind of pushed in an effort, and it kind of reported back as like, I think I pushed a little too much. And then we were basically able to look at your curve and found the exact moment that you started pushing, because we saw their inflection and the slope. So we had a nice easy slope, and then suddenly the slope was up here, you know, for the rest of that effort. And it was really, I remember seeing that, I was like, oh, perfect. This is a perfect illustration. And we talked about it, you know, but yeah, it's the pattern of the information is in the pattern of the heart rate. It is not in the value of the heart rate as you go.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah, and over months and months, you'll get a sense of what your patterns are and what the absolute values are within that pattern. But as you know, in your log, and we talked a lot. If you go out, and I mean, you live in California, so you go out in a day in the summer and it's 95 degrees. Your heart rate is going to be very different than if you were inside in a 70-degree air conditioned environment doing the exact same work, because of that external stimulus. And it could be, when you ate last, how much sleep you have, do you have to go pee? Because a full bladder is going to elevate your heart rate. So there's just, the humidity level is going to elevate your heart rate, because if it's humid, your body's not going to be as efficient sweating and getting rid of its body heat. It's going to hold that body heat a lot more. Your heart rate's going to go up. And so all these things, and they don't, Garmin, Polar, they don't tell you this stuff when they're trying to sell you heart rate monitors. Like, here's a heart rate monitor. This is an extremely complex data output for you to use, and it's going to take you a lot of time to understand it. No, there's like, this is super easy. You just strap it on and you stay between these numbers, and you're going to be, the next Iliad Kipchoge or something like that, and it's just, and unfortunately it's like, it's like what you were saying is like, when you're looking at that heart rate, there's going to be days when you're pushing way too hard because you're trying to get to a thing. And the biggest tragedy is going to be the days where you're doing great and your heart rate's going up, and you're going like, what? I got to slow down because my heart rate's, my cardiac drift is bringing me out of this arbitrary zone, and you're losing these great sessions because you're like, well, I got to keep my heart rate down, and it's
I got to shut it down.
it's horrible. Yeah, it's no fun. But yeah. We'll talk what has improved, so how is this kind of, where has this taken you in the months that we have? Where did we start and where are you now in terms of performance because of kind of this understanding and this performance on UT2? Either one.
I suppose from my perspective, Travis, what I've seen is first of all, you can do 60 minutes quite easily. Mm-hmm. It really is.
And Mark, where did we start at 40? We
might have started around 40, 45.
Yeah.
And these type of, I suppose, understanding that you would have to do all these sessions at 60 when I'd never rode on the erg to that time before, maybe a little daunting. And I think I remember the first 60-minute session that I did, it was it was a little numb in the hamstrings and the butt. And it was mentally quite a challenge to get to 60 minutes. And, now it's just a routine type session. It's just UT2, 60 minutes, let's go. Every now and then we push it up to 90 to 100, and it's almost not that difficult either. But I think it's, obviously now I'm seeing that I can do the distance quite straightforward, but I suppose that immediate comparison is when you were doing a 2-minute split on a rating of 20 for 50 to 60 minutes. And then now 5 months later, you're doing a rating of anywhere between 17 to 18 and you're down around 158. I mean, I've just taken
for 90 minutes, right?
For 90 minutes, and you've taken 3 strokes, 3 to 4 strokes per minute off your cadence, and you've dropped your split, and you feel better. You actually feel fit. You're feeling fitter. You feel great. So that's probably the most obvious thing I see is comparison with the numbers, but the physical side is just, I think I've said it to you, I feel wonderfully fit, feel like I haven't felt this way in 20 years.
Yeah.
So feeling really fit as a result.
And I think that's it too, because a lot of people will be like, they'll see those results, but they get to the end of it and they're just like toast, and it's like, you should never be toast in your base building. Your base building is the foundation. Like it should be easier. Like you should be getting faster. You should be able to do it for longer, and it should be easier. Those are the signs that your training is aerobic training.
And I think I've said it in the notes as well. Whereas I might say I've sat on 40 minutes at a cadence of 17 at a 158 split, and I said I didn't. Maybe 2 months ago I was sitting on 17 for 159, 2, bouncing around that, and I'll say I don't know what happened today, but all of a sudden I'm just seeing 17 line up with 158. And it's that third person looking down thinking, what? I don't know what I'm doing here, but I'm enjoying it. And I'm just rolling along. And then maybe a little bit of fatigue or a little comes in and you just increase to 18. But you're still just, I know you talk about UT1 tapping it along, but certainly with UT2, you tap it along as well, just 17 to 18 strokes a minute. It's a good row.
Yeah. And for people listening too, I mean, you start where you start. A lot of my athletes start at 20 minutes. We're doing 20 minutes, for a normal session, 30 minutes. It's a very patient progression, right? It's like that, Mark, it's been 5 months. I think it's been maybe 6 or 7 with Jeff. And it's about being patient. It's not trying to do too much too fast. It's letting, in a large part, letting the body tell you when it's ready, and that's what I'm certainly looking at each month when I'm reviewing the training and setting the training for the next month is like, what's your training telling me? It's like, is it saying that we should add a little bit of extra volume here? Is it saying let's just kind of keep on going? Is it saying that we can, drop the stroke rate, and go for the same splits, whatever it may be, but I know, I mean, Jeff, we've done a lot with your volume and kind of increasing the quality there of kind of what you've been doing. But yeah.
I think yesterday was a great, I mean, I had that back tweak a couple of weeks back, but it was really interesting how quickly it kind of came back from that. But also the big thing was, like, for me was yesterday, I've never felt that good going for that long. I did a 75-minute steady state yesterday, and I was increasing the speed without trying. It was just coming to me. I stood up and I was like, cool.
Yeah.
I felt like incredibly good. And anytime I've ever done steady states like that, I never walked off and said, all right, cool, let me go sit on the bike for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
But it all, at the same time, it was like at that level where I'm like, no, that's right. I know that's right. But I'm walking off of this feeling like, yeah, I could just keep going like this for a really long time, because it's not my heart or my muscles that are sustaining that. It's simply just the muscle's ability to use the oxygen is just getting so much better. I'm recovering each day, and I'm actually feeling better from day to day than when we started or even when I started, before we started doing it. And I just started getting back on the erg all over again. Every stroke was like hard. And every workout, I'm like, oh God, that just wrecked me. And now I'm not getting wrecked by workouts. I'm like, cool, I could do another workout probably, but I'm not going to.
Yeah, you're not going to. Yeah. And you talk about rest, and that's, we were going to cover a lot of zones in this video, but we'll have to save a lot of them for maybe future videos because we're going so long here. But the work alone isn't going to let you be successful. It has to be balanced with the rest. And so let's kind of, we can kind of do the last part of our video here talking about that balance and that work. And kind of maybe before we do, Mark, we lost your video. I think we still have your audio though. Are you still with us? We lose Mark?
I think so. So he's still there, but. Do you want to talk about the rest? Because actually, there's some.
Yeah. So it looks. Mark might have been cut off, but we'll start here with Jeff and just talking about that rest, because you can't do just the work. And this is another thing I see with athletes is that they do steady state every day, day in, day out. They're like, I'm doing my 60-minute steady state. I'm doing this. I might throw an AT or transport workout here and there. Yeah. Or what's even worse, and like the P plan, whatever these other random plans are that people out there that people are using, they'll be like, we're doing intervals today, and then on our rest day, we're going to do 60-minute steady states. And that's ridiculous. And so, let's talk about what rest really is. And steady state is not rest. Steady state is just putting a training stimulus on a different energy system. Sure, you're going to build less lactate because it's UT2, it's not transport, but doing a 60-minute UT2 is going to put as much stress, a different stress, but still a stress on the body as doing 20 minutes of transport. And the fact that people try to use their UT2 as their recovery days is really destroying their progress and their success. And so
for me, that never ever worked. Anytime they said, hey,
we got Mark back. Mark, can you hear us?
Yeah, I hear you well.
So one of the things, I was saying before is like that had never worked for me before. Like them saying, hey, use your UT2, like those low intensity days as your day off. That never worked for me. I never, ever felt recovered. I feel more recovered now only because I think my aerobic system has gotten so much better.
Yeah.
That it's allowing me to recover more quickly between those sessions, which is allowing me to get more sessions, but only because I've done the work to get to the point where it's like, yes, I can recover from this because I'm executing it properly. And I know the difference between overdoing it and not overdoing it on these workouts. I think also because I've been talking about process, and this is so interesting because of process, it was also, learning to balance all of that into one, which is like realize your work day, your things that are going on around you, your sleep, all of these things you have to treat the same as you're treating the work that you're doing as a part of the process. And you have to realize, recently I had a lot of work in my work, and I was working 70 hours a week, and I was training through that time. And I hadn't realized it was depressing my performance as I went along. And it also kind of peaked because the injury was not from an actual tear or anything like that, or actually injury. It was stress induced, where my body said, nope, I'm not good with this. But I wasn't listening closely enough to let myself give that break. And now I'm understanding that more, because I realized that was part of my performance yesterday, was because I finally dropped on work during the day, and now I'm seeing the results immediately after I finally got a break. And it was one of those things where it's like, it's this process of doing this stuff is learning how to get really good at understanding yourself, not just understanding the program is part of also understanding yourself, and that you'll get far more out of it when you execute each one of those pieces the way you're supposed to, and understanding how you feel, because those times won't come down as you go along if you're stressed. They'll just stay there, or you'll feel worse, and the heart rate will kind of like do that on you. And I understanding those two things are just as important.
And what are you doing on your rest? Because all my athletes have a different work rest cycle, in terms of the pattern that we use, but it's definitely there. Like, and so there's I don't like to call it rest, as both like I call it loading days and unloading days. So loading days are going to be where you're stimulating the body, creating a training stimulus, and your unloading days are keep moving, do something. And so, Jeff, for you, what are those unloading days? How often are you doing them for yours? Because it's a different pattern for all my athletes, and kind of, what do you do in yours to kind of get the most out of your loading days?
It 100 depends on how I feel. Mm-hmm. So there are days like I've done where I've done like a CrossFit circuit only because I feel fresh, but I want to kind of just move overall. Mm-hmm. So I'll do something real quick with CrossFit where it's just like, I'm trying not to let the intensity get too high, and just relax and not push at it. It just be the things where it just kind of refreshes me, and I actually feel better the next day because I kind of just loosened everything up. Mm-hmm. Some days I take completely off because I'm like, nothing feels good. And even if I move, I'm going to feel worse. Mm-hmm. And then some days it's just like, I'm just going to jump on the bike and kind of spin it, or I'm going to go for a walk. It's one of those things where it's like, it totally depends on how I feel, and getting better at understanding which one of those it has to be in order to make sure I'm recovering, because it always comes with the caveat of like, which one of these are going to let me come back and feel awesome tomorrow for my next loading day. It's never walking in and saying, I'm going to get extra work. It's just what's going to make me feel good tomorrow.
So to let people appreciate this, because we've talked about how much each of you kind of have improved over the months. How many days are your loading days on average in a week? And how many days are distinct unloading days you're not working hard?
For me right now, it's 4 and 5. So some weeks it's 4, some weeks it's 5, going through that. Sometimes depending on work, if I have to just squeeze something in and move or rearrange it, it can be 5 and 5, but that's very, very carefully done, where it's like, okay, what is going to make me feel good?
5 and 5 what?
5 days a week where I would actually be doing a loading quote unquote loading day, which actually kind of it's an unloading day if it was extra, because it's not anywhere near the volume I'm usually doing on the loading days. Right. So it's more of just the same thing. What's going to keep me moving and feeling good on the next one versus hitting it again. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, a little bit. It's still, so there's 2 days which are distinct low work unloading days for you, and 5 days. Oh, yeah. 5 days where you're creating a training stimulus.
Yeah.
And then that's we are
4 and 3. So it's like 2 day off, easy day, 2. Easy
there you go.
Day.
All right. So we talked a little bit about like when you get asked, you kind of go to the hard one. So people hear that there's a lot of 4 and 3s in there too. So 4 days of loading, 3 days of unloading. Yeah. Okay. Mark, what's your balance? What do we?
I'm pretty much the same. It's for a 7-day week. First 2 days are loading, unloading. Next 2 days are loading, unloading, and then the 7th day is normally just a just don't go near the erg or don't go near the gym. It's a complete rest day. To let the body, I suppose, recover without any stress on it. I mean, I think every day I'm always doing some type of physical activity, with the base activity being a 30 to 40 minute with the dog in the forest. So there's always, there's never really true idleness in the system. You're always doing something, but generally Sunday I've found it's also a bit of a social day around here. So yeah, you just have that day off, and but you always then come back on the Monday champing at the bit. You want to get on the erg, and you're ready for that next session. And I always find that Monday session generally for UT is a UT2 one, and it's great.
Well, it's just, just to kind of highlight what you guys are saying, because all those training programs out there, almost universally, it's 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. 6 days, and you guys are saying 4 or 5 days of work, 2 to 3 days of rest. And to give people a perspective, so early last year I set the world records, for those sprint distances. Like, albeit that's kind of a niche distance. All right, I'm not setting records in like main things, but they're still fast. I was doing 2 to 3 loading days a week when I set those records. So there was a lot of like 2-3 days of very high quality work, and 3 and 4 to 5 days of like unloading, like get moving. I'm not stressing the body. And so, people, just to kind of give people that appreciation, the fact that it is the quality of what you're doing on those loading days, which is going to create, the benefit. And for me at this time in my life, I perform better with a lot of those unloading days where I'm only stressing the body very strategically through the week. And I think a lot of people are just like, more is better. The more times you stress the body, the better it's going to be. And that's not at all. It's you need to find out what pattern of loading and unloading works best for your body. And then you need to incorporate that. And then you need to be ready to change that, if you need to, and when I was running later in the summer, it was more like 4 or 5 days where I was loading and 2 days where I was unloading. And so it's like, you have to be able to adjust and accommodate. But I think at the core of kind of the training and working with you guys one-on-one and talking is to get you to be able to listen to and understand the body and what it's telling you, and then be able to adapt and make decisions. And we're always going to make, be, boneheaded sometimes and make the wrong ones and push when we can't. But as long as we're listening, those instances will be less frequent, and they're not going to be obvious. Like, because you have so many athletes like, I feel like crap today, but I've got to finish this workout because this paper that I wrote on a month ago says that I should do this workout today. So I have to do it no matter what. And I mean, that blows my mind. And that's why a lot of kind of these school training programs don't make sense to me. I mean, I get athletes, my old athletes come home from college for the winter and they have these training programs. And it's just like, one, the training is absurd. I'm like, I don't know if these people understand training. Either I don't understand training methodology, or these D1 national champion college coaches don't understand training methodology. One of those two is the case. But it's like, they wrote this 2 months ago. They gave it to 50 people and they've all got to do it. And these kids are under the impression that like, well, I have to do this workout because it's on this piece of paper. And it's like, that's just absolutely absurd, and it's like, why? Like, obviously I would have a self-interest in this, but why those college coaches wouldn't find people like me out there? Because there's a lot more like me out there, and basically just like say, athletes, find one of these coaches and work with them over the winter. And I'll tell that coach what I want you to achieve. I just want a lot of base building, or I want you to sharpen this, and then just allow other people in the community to work and develop those athletes individually, instead of the college coaches being like, well, I don't want anyone to mess up my athletes. I'm going to mess up my own athletes.
But I think if you do a session and you're just not feeling it, you're not in the right mindset and you're feeling tired, you just open yourself up for an injury, first off. And second, your technique is just going to capitulate very, very quickly, and you're going to have a very slow hands at the catch. You're going to have a lazy finish. You're going to not rock over properly. You're going to break your leg. You're just going to row yourself into a bad technique and then repeat that technique over and over again for the duration of that session, probably not even hit the numbers that you would like. Yeah, waste of time.
Yeah.
Just
and people can't discount the mental side of that too, of what you're doing to your mental motivation, because you guys are a lot faster. You're putting in a lot more volume than you were, and you're having fun and enjoying it, and you finish your session ready to do more. You know, you're not in the grind. You're not just trying to survive the next day and next. And I'm a firm believer that the vast majority of people really should never spend more than 5 minutes at a time doing something that they don't want to be doing. Like, you know, if you're spending more than 5 minutes on your steady state being like, I really don't want to be doing this steady state, then that mental load is going to accumulate over time, and it's going to lead to burnout, you know, and you're just not enjoying what you're doing. Like there's certainly a challenge, and there's a difference between pushing through the hard part and the challenge and just feeling like you're slogging. You know, it's like, oh, I just don't want to be here. I want to do it, you know, versus just, oh, this is hard, but I'm pushing. You know, there's a difference. But, you know, if people are in that slog, then you got to stop. You know, you got to stop, and your body will condition. Like, you know, for me, like I've been spending so much time running and rowing, I'm not mentally conditioned to being on the erg. For me, that's 10 minutes. Like I hop at 10 minutes, you know, it's kind of like maybe I can get 15 if I kind of push, and then I'm done. But I know that if I do that every day for a month, by the end of that month, I'll be able to sit on for 45, 50 minutes, no problem, because my mind will adapt to it. And I've never along that way pushed myself and been like, well, I got to start off doing 45 minutes and I'm going to spend 35 minutes wanting to be anywhere else other than here. And I think that is the best way for people to build their volume, is just like do the volume that's fun, but do it as frequently as you can. And eventually doing more volume will be fun as well. You know, your mind will condition as quickly as your muscles condition to whatever activity that you're doing, which is key. But yeah, this is kind of our dissertation, I guess it is, on UT2. You know, I appreciate you guys joining me. Is there anything I missed? Anything that, you know, that you guys have picked up, you know, on this subject that you want people to know before we kind of wrap up, sign off?
From my perspective, and this is coming from a master's perspective, with competition in mind, you have to play the long game with rowing. You have to have a goal, and you have to work backwards, and you have to put in the appropriate amount of volume at each of the training zones. But UT2 is critical to the long game, and it's not as sexy as UT1, which is, I quite enjoy UT1, but UT2 is, it's critical, it's essential, and you have to do it, and you have to enjoy it. As Jeff would say, it's part of the process, and you got to enjoy the process. But it does pay dividends, and you know, you have to go slower to go faster, and it's something that took me a while to understand, but you know, I really understand that expression now, why it is like that.
Yeah, I think UT2 should be seen as the basics of, you know, the fitness process. All the high intensity stuff, you know, that people like and it's sexy, that's the stuff that has a very small amount of payoff. The UT2 is something that you build over time and years, and the payoff, when you do get to that little bit of exposure to that high intensity, really creates the biggest payoff. It's kind of, you know, doing that sort of stuff is like high school stuff. You're going to see a little bit of results right now, but you'll never go into college or beyond that to see what you want to see, or the long lasting effects for that matter come from it, unless you do this stuff. It's the basics of being fit for racing this kind of stuff. It's like telling a triathlete, say, hey, don't do that long, slow stuff. You're never going to be fast. Just go out and sprint. You're like, that's not going to work. This is an endurance sport, and that's the basic of it. So the more of it that you do, the higher your potential.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you guys kind of sounding off with me here. And I really hope that, you know, the people that listen, that have the patience to get through, benefit from it. I always say is like, my channel's not for the casuals. It's like, if you're interested in, it's like a university course. If you're going to invest the time, then you're going to get the payoff in terms of the insight. But I really appreciate you guys taking time. I definitely would like to connect again, and we can hit up UT1. UT1 is my favorite training zone. Sounds like, Mark, it might be one of yours as well. It's very fun. It's very nuanced, getting it right, because you are training right at the threshold between aerobic and anaerobic. And so there's definitely a lot to kind of break down there. So maybe we'll do a part 2 in our series, assuming people enjoy and appreciate this one. And if you guys are down for it, we'll definitely make that happen.
Sounds good.
And for those listening, of course, gtsrowing.com, check it out if you're interested in diving in and basically bringing your training to the next level, making sure you understand what's going on. But that's it. So signing off here. We'll catch you guys on the next video, and that's it. Awesome, guys. So hopefully that benefits people the way I imagine it will. So
I think it will. It's the exposure to the idea, because I remember watching your videos before, and that was kind of like, it was hard to understand. Like, making the connection, I think, is hard because you have to practice it for a while to start seeing, truly understanding it.
Yeah.
You have to go back to it over and over, and you're like, oh, okay, I think I'm starting to understand. And then you have to get good at executing it, and that takes practice too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think on some of your videos, when you see the number of views, you can sort of put me down for 10 per view.
Awesome.
That's about right for me. I watched her a few times to really understand.
Don't think there's a couple of thousand individual people looking at this. There's some repeat stuff.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, that's what it was intended for. I mean, it's basically, I try to think of it as university lectures, and people don't have to take notes, because they can just go back and listen to the lecture again. But yeah, every once in a while, people are like, these are too long. Can't you make this like 10 minutes? And I'm like, go listen to Training Tall or Dark Horse or something. If you want the sound bites, and kind of the grade school level information, then there's other places. But if you want the university, if you want your Bachelor of Science in Training Methodology, you can come to my channel. And
my son would come over and go, oh, what are you watching? I'm like, oh, I'm watching a thing about, training zones. And he's like, how many views does he have? I'm like, that's not the point, dude. I was like, the point is that he's trying to explain something that's very complex. It's not about the number of people watching it. It's whether people really get what he's trying to communicate, and it's just funny you saying that. It's like, yeah, that's exactly what the purpose of it is. It's not the views, it's the understanding of what's going on.
I mean, we'd love to get more people watching, but yeah,
of course.
I'm not going to sacrifice for that. It's funny because, I mean, and we've talked, Jeff, because you work kind of along that lines, but the hobby channel that I've been doing has been blowing up lately. Went from like 500 subscribers 2 months ago to, I think I'm close to 5,000, whereas this channel's sitting around like 850, it's still not enough that I can even put a commercial in it and make my 25 cents a month from advertising. But
but I
people,
think what you're getting is super effective, because I know, Mark, we probably account for 20 views on that alone.
Yeah.
Because we went in and watched it over and over because of your training. We're like, oh, wait a minute, what exactly is he trying to say?
Mm-hmm.
What is he exactly trying to get to? And I mean, the initial 5 are like, okay, let me watch that. And then after we talked, I watched another 5 times, go,
yeah.
What exactly, I mean, it's not that it wasn't clear. It's just like, we have to get past our own programming in order to understand where you're going.
And I mean, I remember my process, because I came from the same environment you did, Jeff, where every day was let's see what's the biggest number I can put up on the board. And then I was reading all this training methodology from other sports, mainly from cycling, where they're talking about long, slow distance. And I mean, it took me years to kind of, where I was getting slower and slower on my steady state. And I took it to the extreme of the other end, where I was doing, I would put paper on my drag, and I would have my drag at like 60, 65, and I'd row at like a 27, 28 stroke rate to simulate kind of the high cadence of cycling. And my split would be, lower, it was like maybe 215 or something. And it was basically long, slow distance on the erg. And so I ran the range of everything, and learned that, that where UT2 is now, which is essentially maximum aerobic steady state by Arthur Lydiard's methodology. And so, and Mark, you might be familiar with Lydiard as an Australian, but Lydiard was a big time New Zealand running coach. But his methodology is essentially the foundation of what we do, and his description of what he called maximum aerobic steady state and what we call UT2. When I read it, I was like, dude, that's what I was doing 2 years ago when I was really good, and what I'm not doing now where I'm struggling, even though I'm putting in all this training volume. And then, it all kind of made sense, for me as well, like it is for you. Like the more time you read it, the more you understand, what you're supposed to be doing. And it's just, it's repetition. You got to do the work. But yeah, Mark asked me before you hopped on, Jeff, if I'm going to write a book. And I've been wanting to write a book since I was 21. I remember saying in a coaching interview that they asked me, what my long-term goals were. I said my long-term goals is going to be coaching education. I want to write a book about training methodology. So I've got to get that done before I get hit by a bus or something, or go out the natural way. So
I think it'd be a good idea because it at least would give some people who really need it. Because if I had run into something like that when I was younger, it could have really made a difference. I was never the kind of literature they have out there that really applies to rowing is so limited, and it's even the ones that they do have, it's like it doesn't really talk about it. It's so limited. Some are like, oh, here's how you first start rowing. I'm like, what? How is that?
Or it's just wrong. Like most of the rowing is wrong. It's telling you to do what you did in college. It's telling you to do that stuff.
I've never been able to find really good information on it.
Yeah. I mean, I had to look outside of rowing. Like the vast majority of my training knowledge is from running and cycling, and kind of adapting those principles, to rowing through my experience.
It's very I think an under-researched sport because there's other factors compared to running or rowing that are in it that people don't. It's a power endurance sport, not just pure endurance and not pure power. It's a totally different combination that it's asking you. It's a whole different question that no one's really, I think, addressed in terms of training.
And that's where the cadences and the drag factors come in, and people don't understand that. It's like that's where those are important. And a lot of people will talk about the cadences, but they won't talk about the drag factors, and they don't understand how important it is kind of in that training to kind of bridge that gap and to respect the power endurance. Because you're essentially doing, in terms of the volume and intensities, you're essentially doing a muscular endurance sport, and it's in the cadences and in the drag factors that you are accommodating for the power endurance aspect of it.
I think more people should be talking about drag factor because a lot of these guys talk about, national team doing it, on a setting of 5 or 6, not even talking about the drag factor. Talking 135 and just crazy drag factors. I got injured doing low ratings with those kind of drag factors, and that's how I tore an intercostal. It was it was stupid what I was doing, and it was not a surprise that I didn't get injured. It's a surprise I didn't get injured earlier in that process. It was like I should be thinking, how does this steady state apply to a 2,000 meter race, not how does this apply to just getting your ass kicked?
Yeah. And that's where the cycling came in. Cause I mean, cycling is all about your gearing, you got to know your gear, and you're constantly changing your gearing. And that's when I was like, oh, well, rowing has a gear. Why don't we ever use it? I was like, what happens if we do start using it? It's like good things happen, really good things happen. So awesome.
Even bike, guys who are bikers, they talk about the effects of different training at those different settings. Like, what does this fixed gear bike do versus another, multi-gear bike versus doing low, like Lance Armstrong would do stuff when it'd be in season. He was doing a 120 cadence, or the beginning of season versus the end of his season. He was doing it purposefully. There's a reason why he decided to do that. Yeah,
definitely. We'll keep talking about it. Hopefully people will listen. But, it's been fun. Well, it's pretty late for Mark. So good night to you, Mark. Good afternoon to you, Jeff. And
thanks.
And
nice to meet you, Mark.
Likewise, Jeff.
Awesome. All right. We'll talk again later.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys.
All right. See you guys.